Good evening. Hello, one and all. Hope everyone's okay on this wonderful Tuesday. My name is Paul Nolan. Welcome to MYT Live. And this is a special In Conversation podcast with, well, nothing short of an absolute legend, isn't he? He is someone who I have looked up to for a hell of a long time. And it's a great pleasure to be speaking to him this evening. And also as well, you know, just fantastic to be making some very special announcements with him tonight as well. And yeah, it's this has been a long time coming, and we've been speaking about stuff since before the lockdown. So yeah, it's going to be very, very special to have him here tonight. So without much further ado, I am going to hand over and I'm going to move over, and let's see here. I'm just going to try and start that. Looks like my Zoom has decided to pack the camera up again, which is always unfortunate when we're on a live stream, but we shall try and do as best as we can with it. I'm going to move over here. I'm going to try and bring my camera on the screen so you might be able to see me face a little bit better. There you go. Here he is, Mr. Matthew Bushwacka. How are you, mate?
I'm good, thanks. I can see you on Facebook. I can't see you on Zoom.
I know. Zoom has decided that it does not like my camera on any way, shape or form. We had the same thing with Enamel last week, but I've managed to put my camera on the live stream.
Actually, now I can see you and me on Facebook, but I can't see you on my computer. So I will pretend that this is a telephone call.
Yeah, one of our very long telephone calls that we've been sharing over the last few months.
Yes. Yeah,
indeed. First of all, mate, how are you? How are you getting on?
I'm good, thanks. I'm really well. I'm getting on okay. It's been a testing and interesting time, but it's also been a great time for being creative and being inventive and just having a really good think about what's important, what really matters, and you know what I can do or what I decide to do. So yeah, it's been a very testing time, and very emotional as well. I've been very sad about a lot of the world affairs recently, so that has been affecting my mental health a little bit. Just feeling a lot of collective pain.
Yeah. I think I can definitely empathize with that, and it's definitely an experience that I've had as well, both personally and also collectively. Just sort of feeling the collective state of consciousness, if you will, that the world is currently at. It's at a very interesting tipping point, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, living through what's going on and what's been going on in recent years, but particularly what's going on this year, it's jaw-dropping and eye-opening, and there is a big shift going on, and we are experiencing it, and some of the stuff that's happening is incredibly positive, and some of it is, if I had any more hair, I'd try and pull it out, I think.
I was going to say, mate, you're looking very fresh considering the fact you've been in lockdown for so long. Like, I've still got a half-finished haircut. Like, it's like the top still needs doing, but, you know, you're looking very, very well for it, mate.
I had these aspirations of, like, growing it. When lockdown first started, I had length of hair, not this short, and I had this sort of grand scheme that I was just going to let it grow and it was going to turn into this like amazing sort of wild hairdo. But it got to a point where I just thought, nah, I can't cope.
Yeah.
I need to take drastic action. So out came the clippers, and here we are.
Oh, mate, I don't blame you, because I was out on my bike yesterday, and it was really funny because I saw a guy who clearly followed through on your intention, and he looked like Tom Hanks in Castaway. Looked like he'd just come back off the island, like he had like beard out here and stuff, and the only thing he was missing was like a volleyball named Wilson underneath his arm. That was about it. So yeah, I totally agree with you on that one, mate, and it's it's been difficult on a number of different levels, you know, just to sort of maintain sort of like personal rhythm and personal routine. Like you said, you know, you get periods where it's like you feel really sad, and then there's like weird periods of almost like elation. And I went through a period about sort of 5-6 weeks ago when I was literally telling everyone that I was like having the time of my life in lockdown and I was never going to come back out, and I was like enjoying it incredibly. And then a few weeks later, it's just like you just completely hit the wall. Do you know what I mean? You just there's like a monotony to life, if you get what I mean, and it's hard to stay inspired in that form, really. You know, when you're looking at the same four walls all the time.
I do, and I've been going through various different parallels and waves of experiencing. Or you can call it a lockdown. I guess it's not really a lockdown now, but experiencing all this sort of restrictive existence in different ways. And part of it has been, I'm in my bubble with my partner, my fiance, and working and doing all the things that we were doing anyway. And, you know, very lucky that there's the weather's been good, and I walk my dog every day, so I'm always outside, and there's all these positives. And to a certain extent, a lot of the work that I do these days does involve me working from home. So that's kind of all right. But then I also have these moments where I think about what I've been doing with my life for the past 34 years. And I just feel like the rug's been yanked from under my feet, and I'm just like on the floor, and I'm not getting up again in a hurry. And it's like, you know, okay, I mean, this has changed. And you know, for the entertainment industry and events industry and industries that do involve lots of people in one place close together, we you know, it's extremely complex at the moment. And I think because this whole scenario globally is still so new that it's quite easy to lull oneself into a false sense of security. You know, it's sort of 3-4 months in, I'm still healthy. Most of the people I know are healthy. It seems like everything, it's safe to leave the house again. And dare I say it, probably it is, but we don't know. And because we don't know, and I totally get this, like the powers that be can't really take that risk and say, okay, well, you're probably okay, so you can all go back to a club, or you can all go back to a festival, or you can all go back to a rock concert or whatever concert, or you can all kind of go back to being close to each other. Because how can they say that if anything, if it picks up again, and then it's on their heads that they've told people it's okay to go back to work. And I don't mean the people that have already gone back to work or the people that work in other sectors. I'm specifically talking about the entertainment industry and what that means. And so, you know, we just have to watch and see and wait. But, you know, like sometimes I feel like this bubble that I'm in with working from home and being healthy and stuff is fantastic. And then there are moments where I just think to myself, is this it now? You know, is this it? Because we don't know when it's going to come back or when something else is going to come along, or is this how we have to live now? And that's a strange feeling.
Yeah, it's a very strange feeling, especially for, you know, people like us who are so used to like traveling all the time as well, and, you know, very easily and conveniently and very regularly like swapping one environment for another. And, you know, my first sort of feelings when we first went into lockdown was, I just remember like the first week or so was like a massive, like, it was almost like an adrenaline dump, because you don't realize like just how far you go on, you know, moving on to the next thing, and now I've got to be here, and I've got to get on a plane, I've got to go there, and I've got to go and speak at this event, or I've got to go and play a gig here, or I've got to go and see that person. And when it all just abruptly stops the way that it does, there's almost like a kind of an unraveling that takes place. And yeah, it took me a good 2 weeks to really like fully adjust to it, because I wasn't like a nervous wreck, if you will, but I was very anxious for a couple of weeks because I was just like, you almost have like an itch to like, I'm normally, even just like on a normal day, I'm normally nipping out to the coffee shop, or I'm nipping to the shops, I'm doing this, I'm working out, I'm going to the gym, or I'm going to a yoga class. And that all kind of came to a very abrupt end. And you kind of just sat there. And it was actually very similar to, you know how you feel after you play a big gig? Where it's like you have that big, massive crowd reaction. And then 15 minutes after you finished, you sat back in a hotel room on your own. And you've got all this adrenaline pumping through you, and it's like, what do I do with all this stuff?
I can tell you something very interesting about that, actually, which is that, and this I'm reflecting on this as I speak to you, is that weirdly, I've actually experienced that without even leaving my house. So, like, whereas before I'd be on the road and I'd fly off somewhere and go for dinner with some people I may or may not know, and then back to the hotel, and then go and do the gig and play to however many people, and then, you know, providing it's a good gig and it's busy and the crowd are into the music, and, you know, I'm in the zone, come back with this massive adrenaline rush, and then suddenly I'm either sort of in a car driving hundreds of miles, like, and then in the hotel room and asleep, and just left with this sort of weird void. But I've been getting that after my live streams on Thursday nights, and it's been profoundly odd, I have to say, that depending on what my actions are after I've finished, but there's this sort of hour and a half where I'm DJing from my living room, playing records with a big sound system in the living room, and very kind neighbors that don't seem to mind the noise. But there's this energy and adrenaline, and I know that there's quite a few people watching at the same time, because some of them are my friends, and we see these comments sort of bouncing around and people talking to each other in their own little sort of mini chat rooms. And there's the friends and fans side of it, and then there's this whole kind of other sort of external crowd of people that sort of pop in and have a look and disappear or whatever. But then it finishes, and then I'm like, 2 minutes later, I'm like in my kitchen washing the dishes, or like in complete silence, like doing something like quite domesticated, and thinking, did that just happen? You know, and it's the same sensation. It's that feeling of adrenaline from the music and the passion and the love of the music and the playing records and the really feeling it, to the suddenly just being nothing. And like, if it was the clubs, you know, historically it would be like a bunch of people going, where are we going now? Where's the after party? What are we doing now? Where are we going? And, you know, if you want to go back years and years, I'd have been like the one asking the question, you know. Now it's quite nice. We sit down on the sofa usually afterwards, and sometimes listen back to the music and reply to some comments and whatever. But it is interesting that same experience that I used to have when I was on the road all the time, of going from, like, you know, 100 miles an hour to naught, and how that felt, that actually it's got nothing to do with actually being in that space or being really far away. It's to do with connecting with lots of people that are all enjoying the music at the same time. And that's amazing. If you think about it, that is actually amazing. And the fact that that feeling can happen without being there. And I'm not saying it's a replacement. Don't get me wrong. It is not a replacement for the real thing, but there is a connection. There is a connection with people. And at the end of the day, that's the most important thing.
No, absolutely. Yeah. I think it maybe comes from, regardless of the context of the environment that it's happening in, whether it's in, again, your living room, or whether you're in, you know, whether you're playing, I don't know, the main room of Pasha. It's the fact that you are, in effect, the conduit for people's experience, and everything's kind of flowing through you, and, you know, you're sort of like in control of the destiny of it all. I think that's a big feeling. That's a big part of it for me. And I mean, it's funny listening to you now. Like, I feel similar actually having done these streams. So when I do like a live class, like we do, you know, with MYT, or we do like a production breakdown like we've done with some artists recently, you know, it's the thing of like having to almost like keep the show on the road a little bit. is kind of one of the big reasons behind that. It's fascinating, isn't it? That like the environment is actually, you would think it would be the determining factor, but it's actually fairly minor.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, man. It's very interesting. So I was going to ask you about the Thursdays, and they seem to be really popular, and you seem to have done really, really well with that through the lockdown, mate.
Well, the truth is, my partner was encouraging me to do live streams as soon as lockdown happened. She was like, "Why don't you do a live stream?" And I was completely anti the whole idea. I was like, "I'm not doing that. It's naff. It's no good. People will hate it. It's really awful. It's this. It's that. I really wasn't feeling it until we did it, and then I think the thing that it's really done, the two things that it's done is, one of them is it's given us something to look forward to every week when we weren't allowed out, and just a real energy release. So, even regardless of whether there was a video camera in the room or not, and just that sort of treating it like it's Thursday night, we're going to have a party, and then we're all going to clap for the NHS, and that's our thing. Although we've stopped doing the NHS thing a couple of weeks ago now, just because we changed the time of the live stream, and it seemed to fizzle out a little bit. But there was something, just a real release and a relief from the stress of the lockdown and what was going on, to just have that one thing to look forward to every week. But the other thing is that it's got me in touch with my record collection again, and playing records at home. And before I moved to Ibiza, I had a big recording studio in Labatt Grove with the record label offices, and all the walls of the inner studio and the outer walls of the office, from floor to ceiling, were just records. And so my house was fairly close by, and so I'd kind of walk to the studio and make music, play records, whatever. But I never had my record collection in my house since the year 2000, and I moved to Ibiza in 2013. And then coming back to England from Ibiza and moving where I live now and having the records here, it's been really, really nice. But before lockdown, I still wasn't really playing the records. They were there and they looked nice and whatever, but I rarely pulled them out. And most of the shows that I was doing was WAVs, digital music. I'd been sent music that I'd digitized from vinyl, but I wasn't really playing the records. But now it's been like, I think this week will be the 13th or 14th week of playing the records every week, just for the Thursday. And there's been a few other shows in between as well that have been really fun and interesting and cool concepts. But yeah, it's just been that thing, like, okay, we know Thursday's coming. It's a bit like a sort of night out, night in. And it's just fun. So yeah, it's just fun.
It's funny because listening to you explain it, it kind of, the word residency almost kind of came through my mind again, and it kind of reminds me of, like, at the same time, at the same place every week, regardless of whether it's like a club like yourselves were with the End in London, with obviously with yourself and Layo, or with us with Cream up here up north in Liverpool, or various other places. Like, you had your resident DJs who were there every single week. And even though now it's like a live stream during a lockdown with, like, you're playing in your own living room, it kind of reminds me of a residency, which you can kind of build on week to week almost. Is that kind of like a similar feeling?
Well, ironically, I was about to start a residency in London playing vinyl, and then lockdown happened. So I've got two partners, very, very lovely people, Italian friends of mine, and we started a brand called Resonate, and we just launched the first 3 nights. We just put them up on Resident Advisor and Facebook and what have you, and we booked guest DJs, and it was going to be monthly Fridays in a new venue in Soho. with a 5 a.m. license, and we were ready to go. You know, small venue, 300 people max, and then this happened, and then the live streams happened, and that's become the night out, night in sort of thing. But what's been interesting is I've been talking to my partners sort of throughout this period as well, and we're making some decisions. We just have to wait and see as to what is going to be allowed and when. But I'm considering making it a bit more frequent than monthly, and possibly even weekly, because I have realised just how much I love playing records in the same place at the same time every week. And it's what I did when I started DJing when I was very, very young. I was 16, and by the time I was sort of 17, in between 17 and 18, I had 4 weekly residencies in London.
Wow.
And they were all amazing clubs. So I had Saturday nights at the Park in Kensington High Street, where I used to play with Frankie Valentine and Dave Angel. And the promoters of that were the people that put on the old Sunrise Waves, and it was an amazing party. And then I did Friday night at Busby's, which doesn't exist anymore, which was on Charing Cross Road for the Crazy Club. And then I also did Saturday night at Astoria for the Crazy Club with Carl Cox and all sorts. And then Sunday mornings at Busby's and Sunday night at the Limelight. So it was every week, you know, and there was something really magical about weekly residencies, about being able to create and carve your sound and just do your thing. And, you know, early sets, warming up the room, whether it's the warm-up set or the last set, or sometimes the whole night, just going on that journey and just creating that sort of vibe, and building a kind of little core audience. Of course, you get new people coming and going every week, but the people that know roughly what to expect in terms of quality, in terms of variety. And yeah, so I think I've gone off on a bit of a tangent, but the point being that when they let us back into the clubs, and this club in London is a small club, I'm hoping that they will be able to operate at a reduced capacity and we can continue to do our thing when the time comes. So we're just waiting for the powers that be to make that call, but with full respect of the fact that it may not happen for a long time, or it may not be safe. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a tangent at all, mate, because it's going to lead into some questions that I wanted to ask you anyway. But I think it's fascinating, first of all, that it looks like what you're doing is something that could actually and was already planned, obviously. But it's obviously started off as a live stream during a lockdown, but may well transition into something in real life once it's safe to do so. I think that's absolutely fascinating. I think it's really, really interesting. And then on top of that, I mean, because obviously we've been having a lot of talk on the platform, and I've been talking to a lot of our, you know, members on MYT and a lot of people generally in the scene, because one of the things that's been great about this is being able to connect with people that you wouldn't necessarily be able to have conversations with, because you're either flying to a gig or they're, you know, on tour, or, you know, you never really get a chance to really sit and properly catch up. And, you know, there's a lot of thoughts at the moment about, you know, what is the scene going to look like when we emerge from this. And it's interesting what you're saying about this being like a small club with almost like a residency angle, because my sort of firm view is that that's what it's going to restart as, because I can't really see at the moment until, like you say, it's like really safe to do so. You know, huge capacity festivals and stuff like that happening for a while. I can more see things like, you know, smaller clubs, that resident vibe, people staying in their local area, maybe some reduced capacities to begin with, and it maybe grows a little bit. I mean, what is that how you're sort of attacking it as well, or what's your thoughts on where we might be going?
Well, my thoughts are speculative. That festivals are just not happening this year in England. Maybe at the end of the summer there'll be some sort of reduced capacity thing. But the issue at hand is if they want to implement social distancing, they can't give anybody alcohol because as soon as people start drinking, all those boundaries go out the window. And I've even seen it in like there's a pub close to where I live in Hampstead that we drove past a couple of weekends ago, and they were trying to do this social distancing thing. It doesn't have a garden; it just has an outside next to a sort of little street, and there were people queuing up to buy drinks out from outside the pub, and they were probably about a metre apart. And then there were people queuing up inside to buy drinks, and I couldn't quite work that out. And then there were people standing next to each other all along the windows at the outside of the pub, and then all grouped together in the street next door. And it just wasn't happening. It's just not viable to give people alcohol or whatever and expect them not to go anywhere near each other.
Yeah.
And it's a big enough ask if they're sober, so like you may have seen some of these I find them incredibly like excruciating videos to watch of these sort of weird looking raves where people have been like sort of put inside little squares where they can't leave their
taped
squares.
off and all that stuff.
I mean, come on, really? Why? Like just why? So I can't see that working. And then, Luciano just did a couple of gigs at the weekend. I saw in Switzerland where they had limited capacities of, I think, between 100 and 300 people. And I had a brief peep at those videos, and yeah, that's how many people were there, but they weren't 2 meters away from each other. So again, I think it's really just, if these numbers keep going down of infections and what have you, then hopefully the doors will open again soon. But if they start going up again, then I don't think they will. But if they do, then it's a different matter, So, but then you can't. I mean, when you think about it, we're talking about nightclubs here, but bars are no different. Okay, so you might not have necessarily a big sound system and a DJ and flashing lights, but a bar playing music is essentially exactly the same issue. There's so many thousands of businesses right now that are in massive danger of completely closing down. I mean, if bars are allowed to open but at massively restricted capacities, how are they going to pay their rent? How are they going to pay their staff? So hopefully the restrictions will be lifted and people will be allowed to be a bit close to each other, and things will slowly but surely get better. In regard to my sort of small club Residency, in all honesty, there's a part of me I think human beings adapt to their environment. And in all honesty, there's a part of me that's a little bit scared to go back to how it was. And it's nothing to do with catching a virus. It's and you probably want to talk a little bit about this, but I'm sort of coming up to 5 years clean and sober, and I've never spent this long away from a club environment or a party environment, shall we say, or people drinking even. And for me, there is a fear of being around lots of people that haven't been out for ages that are suddenly drinking and doing whatever all over again. And it's not because I think I'm going to do it. It's because I can't imagine being around that energy. It frightens me a little bit. It's like, whoa, the idea of it, for me, it's a bit foreboding, the other side of the coin, it'd probably be absolutely amazing. So, but my fear is like, whoa, I've been with my partner and my dog and not seen that many people for quite a long time now. Like the idea of being in a place packed with thousands of people that are all kind of drunk and
yeah. I mean, I even get it like looking at videos, and it's like I almost like get kind of like heart palpitations just seeing that many people in one place. It's like I'm now like so kind of like conditioned to like when I see thousands of people, even if it's like a throwback video, I'm like, oh my god, what are you people doing? That kind of thing. It's that kind of reaction, if you know what I mean. So yeah, I totally get where you're coming from. It was bad enough for me a couple of weeks ago when the weather was absolutely brilliant everywhere, and it was lovely up here in Liverpool as well. And I live right by the beach in Liverpool, and I went out for a ride on my bike, and fair play, you've got to play the cards you were dealt. And one of the local pubs, which was right by the beach, which kind of spills out from the beach entrance, they were serving pints through the window, And as you were saying, just hundreds of people out in the street, no social distancing, everyone loving it, everyone having a drink, doing the thing. And because I hadn't seen that for so long, riding my bike through that all was like a genuinely like mildly traumatic experience. It was like, I don't know how to manage this energy now, because my state of consciousness has been in just such a different gear for that long. I've almost forgotten how to kind of like hold myself in those types of situations. So I think it's definitely going to be interesting, and I think there's definitely going to be a degree of, you know, obviously we're going to talk a little bit about them. We already are talking a little bit about the mental health aspect, but I definitely think some people are going to feel some anxiety as things start to ramp up. So it's going to be interesting to see how people kind of meet with that and try and move through that into some form of normality again, you know?
Mm-hmm.
For sure. So obviously you've got this whole, you know, lovely thing going on with the live streams and everything else. I mean, has it been a productive time in the studio for you as well, or has it been like a little bit more up and down? Like, what's been the studio reality for you?
A real mixed bag with the studio, actually. So I released my sample pack with Loop Masters a month or so ago, and that's something that I've been working on for quite some time. With the lockdown, that sort of speeded up me sort of crossing the T's and dotting the I's of the finishing touches that I needed to do before I could present that and get that off to the guys and get that out. So that's taken up a little bit of my studio time. The other thing that I've been doing, which has been great with some people, is some online long distance collaborations. So although we haven't been doing them live, I have sent and been sent parts and stems, or not even whole tracks, but 16 bars or 32 bar sections and loops of various ideas, and me and whoever else I've been connecting with have been doing our own thing to those and then bouncing them back to each other. So I've got a great collaboration on the go with Darius Sarosian. We've got two or three things on the go, actually. That's really exciting. It took a while for us to make that happen. It's something that I was talking about with Darius long before the lockdown happened. So it's been great that started to manifest itself. Then Archie Hamilton as well. So we're sort of 3/4 way through a collab on a couple of tracks, which are sounding fantastic.
Amazing.
Then Pig and Dan, my fantastic techno friends that are based over in Mallorca, have sent me some stems, and I've started working on one of those at the moment. And then I've been remixing one of my favorite tracks, which is proving very challenging and taking me a long time, which is Valley of Paradise by Psych Magic. And I've got these amazing stems, and it's just such a work of art. And I've done the remix, and it sounds okay, but it's not good enough. So that's on my list of things to sort of come back to. And then there's another collaboration with the biggest DJ in the world, as far as I'm concerned, he is anyway. But I've forgotten to send him the parts, so that's why that's not getting done. So there's a few things in my studio that are sort of boxes that need to be ticked off and stuff. And there's something else I've been working on in the studio, but I'm sure you want to tell everybody about that.
Well, we'll get to that. We'll get to that in due course. We'll string that out a little bit more.
I have to say that's been taking up a fair amount of my time.
Well, I apologise for that, because it sounds like you're busy
enough. No, but it's been very enjoyable. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. It sounds like you've been busy enough as it is. I mean, especially with the sample pack as well, because like I don't think people really realise just how much work a sample pack really is.
I didn't, but you know, I actually want to. Now I've made it, I want to make another one. I really want to make another one. And what I really also want is to hear what other people have done with the sample pack. So at some point in the future, I think I'll have to put a little post out either through Loop Masters or through my socials, just to ask people to send me what they've been working on, because I'm really curious. But yeah, it was a lot of work, and I enjoyed it. I went through tons and tons of old arrangements, and as well as writing new loops and new sounds and bass lines and arpeggios and all of that stuff. I went through hundreds of old tracks and arrangements, and I managed to salvage, if you want to use the word salvage, I managed to extract lots of different parts from all these tracks. Some of them were released, but a lot of them are unreleased tracks. But there's a whole other sample pack in there, because there are tracks that were done on versions of Logic that are so old that I can't open them without getting hold of an old computer that's got an old version of Logic on, and then upgrading that arrangement into that version. I think I need to go from like version 3 to version 7 and then go onto a newer computer, and you know how this works. So there's all those tracks which have got lots and lots of sounds in them, but there's also all my EMU or my emulator sample banks, which are on zip disks and jazz disks from my zip drive and jazz drive. So I've got all the disks and I've got the sampler, but I need to get it repaired. So, but there's thousands of samples that I made in there that I want to get to. So it's the can of worms called the sort of techno geeky nerdy recording studio. You know, you know.
Mate, I'm getting moist here just listening to you talk about zip disks and all this stuff. I'm just like, oh God, let me at the archive. Like, it would just be so amazing. And I love the sound of old samplers as well. Do you know what I mean? Like the old EMUs and the SP1200s. They've just got like an attitude to them. They've just got like a crunch to them. Do you know what I mean? That is very, very seductive to somebody like me, that kind of like bridges that gap between the more modern stuff, which is great, but I do find a little clean, and then that type of thing which is nice and gritty and dirty and just got a bit of grubbiness to it as well, you know. So yeah, it's really interesting, dude. Really, really interesting. And yeah, the pack is fantastic. And, you know, there's been lots of comments already about, like, you know, how everyone's loving the pack. So, you know, congratulations on that, mate. And yeah, it's actually really interesting to hear someone who's like, I want to hear what you're doing with the pack, which is fantastic, which you don't often hear from someone. It's like, oh, here's the sample pack, now give me your money. Do you know what I mean? So it's nice to actually, you know, to have someone who understands that these things have a life of their own, and it's interesting to see what people do with your works of art, really.
Well, I think part of my curiosity is that I found myself sampling myself recently when working on projects for other people. So, well, if I'm sampling myself, I wonder what other people are doing when they're sampling me, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Are you seeing other samples, or are we going steady, or what, like?
So as I speak those words, I'm wondering if that's actually a narcissistic quality, or if it was just like the sort of shortcut to trying to get the sound that I wanted, you know. Because you know, I think we will end up talking about this a bit later. But you know, with the remix I did for Archie, you know, I did end up sampling my own drums that I'd already written years ago to try to get the track to sound a little bit more like that sound from years ago that he wanted it to sound like. So yeah, I mean, none of this really, you know, it doesn't matter, does it, as long as it sounds good. But I'm dying to hear what other people have done with some of these samples.
Yeah, but everyone, including yourself, is fair game, really, when it comes to sampling, because that was like the art of sampling, really, you know. And you know, being able to almost look upon the entire world as an instrument and everything as being part of like an extended palette that you could tap into. So why wouldn't you view your own records that way?
And actually, Layo and I were very unlucky with sampling when it came to not throughout the span of our recording career, but when we signed to XL Recordings and Nightworks, the album had already come out. Low Life had already come out, and then we signed with them to do the next album. And we put Nightworks together, and there were at least 3 tracks that didn't make it onto that album because we couldn't get sample clearance. And it was at a time when the Avalanche's album came out, and there was every sample ever made by anybody in one album. And it was, I think that actually was licensed through XL as well. And we just couldn't understand why we were sort of getting knockbacks on some. some really, really great tracks that had some samples from famous bands in them. And,
No, exactly. Yeah.
we actually found out that, I mean, one of the tracks, which was probably going to be the intro track on the album if we'd been allowed to use it, sampled Supertramp track, Goodbye Stranger.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason they wouldn't let us use it is because another dance band or dance act had sampled them not that long ago before us and made the worst dance track ever that they hated so much that they swore they would never let anybody sample them ever again. So those were the sort of bits of bad luck that we had when it came to sampling. You know, it was like, well, the band, they probably love the what you've done with it, but because this happened to them, they said no to everyone. You know, so those kind of things used to come up for us.
No, definitely, yeah, definitely. Do you think that's still a reality now, or do you think the landscape's kind of changed where sampling's concerned?
Well, I guess it depends what it is. And so if you try and do a live stream and play hip hop, you're getting taken off air after 2 seconds. You know, all that stuff's so protected and copyrighted and looked after and big money and whatever. And you know, a lot of that stuff's made from samples as well. But there are things that are you know, deemed acceptable and things that are not. I don't really know where the land lies so much with that these days. You've got all these sort of mashups that get made. I think that the downside of it has been that a lot of producers don't really bother now. They just get someone else to sing or re-sing not that well the original and then just use that because someone else sang it, so they can use it and then put it out, and then unfortunately you just end up with a sort of substandard version. And one of the things that I used to love about the art of sampling pieces of music was that taking just that short section of something that a band of very talented musicians, incredibly talented musicians, have come together, written a song, got into, for argument's sake, you know, a massive recording studio in the 1970s or 80s and meticulously recorded and produced this piece of music for an album. And that little bit of sample is capturing part of that performance and that essence and what's got into that. And then when you start to incorporate that, not as your track, but into your track, and you're weaving it in, and it's just in there and you can't really distinguish the sample, but there's part of that energy becomes part of the life and the breath of the track. And you know, it's just that's what I love about the art of sampling, where you're using samples in a way where you're capturing the essence of the original recording, but without it necessarily being about that's what it is. I'm not saying that every track I've ever sampled or made or have used samples on abides to that kind of philosophy, but for me that's what I really love. It's like when there's something about the track you can't put your finger on, but it's just got that kind of magic,
like the X factor that is just like completely intangible, but there's just something about it that just makes it work. Yeah, and you guys were just like the kings of doing that. Like when I was kind of coming up, like sort of between sort of like 98 and like, you know, sort of 2004, 2005, that kind of thing.
Yes.
They were the years, like, and they were very much my sort of like, you know, my breeding ground. They were my apprenticeship, if you will. And just remembering just some of the things that you guys were coming out with, and not just like in terms of like, you know, the more obviously the stuff that you guys became known for with like, you know, the more sort of bigger vocal stuff, but just some of the break stuff that you were coming out with, you know, on your own, as well as like as with Layo as well, was just absolutely formative. And I felt like that whole breakbeat revolution that happened around that time, you guys were absolutely at the forefront of it.
Oh, it's an amazing time. I was actually, you know, looking back or thinking back to that time, I was really disappointed that, in my opinion, the break scene didn't turn into something more. I felt that it kind of peaked and then regressed quite quickly to something slightly soulless, and then it just didn't really move, and then it just kind of fizzled a little bit. And you know, I don't know if that's just the way it was always going to be, because there was a sort of finite amount of kind of old school breaks and rare grooves and samples that sort of put together encompass that sound, or if it was just that there were only a handful of people that were doing it and it was just it was very samey, or for whatever the reason it didn't turn into what I thought it was going to turn into. But there was a period of time where it was just the energy was just so ridiculous.
Ridiculous. And like, you know, my tastes in that like kind of spanned more towards the proggy side of things, because that was just what I was into and who I was hanging around with. Because like, you know, when breaks had its big moment, like I was hanging around with Lee Burridge quite a lot, and Lee was just almost exclusively a breaks DJ at that point and playing a little bit of progressive house and a bit of techno here or there. And honestly, some of the sounds that were coming through at that point were just unbelievable. But I totally agree with you. By around about sort of 2004, I want to say, something like that. Like I owned a part of the record shop in Liverpool, and just remember like getting records in, and it just became like, you know, the Sesame Street theme tune with a new school break underneath it. And, you know, that was it. It was like there was no kind of innovation. And it's interesting what you're saying about, like, there was only maybe a certain amount of people doing it. It may be like a combination of that and those people sort of like hitting the wall a little bit, and they didn't really like move on, or they didn't really like innovate in any way. It just became sort of like faintly contrived, really badly sampled, you know, bootlegs in the end. It was really sad.
Yeah, and you know, across the water, it wasn't that much different either. I mean, you had these sort of San Francisco, Miami people. You had DJ Icy, and you had the Bassbin Twins, and they were kind of, you know, getting hold of these records back then was just like, I'd be so excited that I know that it was them that had produced it, and I had an expectation of, you know, what it was going to be like and whatever. But it was literally like 3 or 4 people that were kind of producing those kind of tracks from across the water, and then over here it was, you know, it was, you know, Adam Freeland and Rennie Pilgrim, and, you know, and a handful of other people, and then, you know, you would get the odd track that incorporated some of that vibe, and then that was kind of it for a while, and it just sort of fizzled away, really. But I think for us, and for me and for us, one of the things that I feel quite pleased about was that we didn't have, I mean, 12-inch dance records were one thing, but when it came to their albums, and obviously we spent quite a lot of time writing albums, we didn't have that sort of genre constriction with anything that we did. And that worked really well for us until our 3rd album. And then I think that was when the minimal explosion had happened, and Local Dice was starting to get big, and it became, people couldn't, we couldn't be pigeonholed, or there was no genre that we fitted at that point in terms of releasing music. Like, so the 3rd album had, like, Feels Closer had like a Brazilian rock track on it, it had ambient music on it, it had sort of down tempo, it had a techno track, it had this, that, the other, but there was no identity that new generation were like, yeah, this really works with what I'm into right now. And so in a way it was hard, but before that, at the period that you're kind of talking about as well, with breaks and stuff, we used to love making really like down tempo trip hop kind of chill out breaky stuff as well, drum and bass stuff. We were remixing Ronnie Size, we were, you know, there was no rules, there was no tempo constriction, there was no rules, you know, and that was a joy.
Yeah, it felt much freer in a way, because it's like now I feel like you kind of, there's so much like granularity, if you know what I mean, in terms of like genres and subgenres, and, you know, people have you know, kind of, they stick to their kind of wheelhouse only, really, which is really interesting. But back in the day, it was like, it was completely acceptable. In fact, it was even encouraged that people do completely different things and go into completely different genres. And, you know, it was always really fresh when like you guys came out with like, you know, stuff on like Oblong, and, you know, you'd come out with some amazing sort of like really, really cool tech house thing. And when I say tech house, I mean like proper tech house, like London tech house. Like that's where I go to. I go to Terry Francis. I go to Yucatech. I go to those types of people. Like when people use the term tech house, like I immediately go in that direction. And then your next release was like something on like a breaks label, and it was completely off the reservation, 180 degrees in completely the opposite direction. And you know, it wasn't just people were okay with it. People were like, Jesus, listen to that. Like, where have those two come from in the space of like, 6 weeks? And I think there may need to be a little bit more of that these days. And I think I'm feeling it starting to come back a little bit, where there's a bit more experimentation and there's a bit more fluidity with genre these days. So yeah, it's an interesting time to kind of learn from. And, in terms of like music technology, you've really like crossed the paradigm from probably completely hardware right the way through to completely in the box. So what's that journey been like? And have you retained pieces of hardware, or are you a bit more of a hybrid kind of producer now? Like, what's the journey been like?
Well, I suppose the short answer is I'm really lucky that I didn't start buying modular equipment because that can of worms is probably the most lucrative, like hippie crack looking.
Dude, you have no idea.
Flashing lights, bleepy, like knob twiddling heaven,
Yeah.
And I've nearly gone there so many times, man. Especially when I sold my house and I had like, and there was I built a new studio in Ibiza, and I started thinking about it, and I was like,
they call it Euro crack for a reason, mate.
However, I would say that I have experienced people with enormous amounts of equipment making pretty crap noises. Like, I mean, it's like, really? You bought all that stuff and you plugged all those things into each other, and now you've managed to create a hi-hat that sounds like, and I'm like, right, okay, well,
yeah. I said that to Anama last week, because he's got a really nice little modular setup, and I said, so okay, first questions first about your Eurorack setup. How do you not make it sound like a car alarm? And like, there's a meme which says like, I've just spent $10,000 on this shit and it sounds like my car's been stolen. And honestly, like that is such the reality. And I know what you mean about the Eurorack stuff. I've been down that rabbit hole. Thankfully, I was spending somebody else's money at the time. Which meant that, I had access to it and I had to build the whole thing. But obviously, I didn't get to keep the thing, which is unfortunate. But I definitely got a lot of playtime out of it. So I feel you on that one, mate.
There's no doubt about it. If all that modular scene was as rife as it is now, 20 years ago, I would have been all over it. My one wall of my studio would have been modular. There's no doubt about it. So where am I at? Well, when I first started, I had an Atari 520 ST and a cracked copy of Cubase on a disc, and a black and white monitor, and that was it. And I bought an old Yamaha RX-11 drum machine. Then I bought a Sequential Circuits Pro 1 at a jumble sale for 20 quid.
Oh, mate, don't.
And I borrowed a friend of mine, borrowed his Yamaha DX100, which I absolutely loved, and actually borrowed again years later, and then gave back, and would like to then now borrow again.
So if you're listening.
I'll mental note to myself. Borrow that again. Yeah. And then I taught myself Cubase, and no instruction manual, and I'd spend hours and hours doing something which after a few months I realized one keystroke would do it instantaneously. It was a bit like that for a while, but it wasn't a bad way to learn. I think it was, at the time it sort of served its purpose, and I didn't have money really at that, as a teenager. I was just trying to figure it all out. But my journey goes back a bit further than that, really, because my cousin, who's no longer with us, sadly, he was a a musician, and he was into synthesizers. And when I was around 12, I went to his house, and he showed me. He had a Juno 106, and he had an Apple computer, and he had one of the first samplers that had been sort of invented back then. And he showed me, he got me to speak into a microphone and then put it across a keyboard, and then let me play on his synthesizer. And from that day on, I was hooked. That was it. I was like, I want a synthesizer, and there was a shop across the road from in the shopping centre close to where I lived, called Chromatics. And it was a synthesizer and electric piano shop. And I used to go in there every single day after school and put the headphones on, or ask them if I could, play the keyboard and just get stuck in and just want to play. And they had like Roland SH101 in there, and they had a DX7 and M1, and as the years went on, and for me that was it. And I used to buy, ever since I visited my cousin, I might have even been slightly younger, I can't remember, but I used to buy Sound on Sound magazine every month. And I was reading it before I even knew what anything that I was reading about meant. I would read it cover to cover. I didn't understand anything I was reading, but I read it. And I was still buying it up to about a year ago. But that, for me, that was the Bible. That was the okay. And, eventually I did start to understand what things meant. It just started to sort of slowly sink in, because I was so interested. I had to know, what is this? What does it do? So yeah, that was my kind of entry into equipment, really. And I didn't have a lot of equipment. My first sampler was an Emax 2 keyboard. I didn't do the Akai route. I did the EMU route, and bought this Emax 2 keyboard, which I absolutely loved, sampling keyboard. And slowly but surely, I sort of built up the studio over a number of years, and built a couple of smaller studios, one at home, and then one at the back of a record shop in West London. And then as time went on, I ended up with a big space in Ladbroke Grove, and that just started to grow. And when I was working with Layo in there, we bought quite a few really cool synths, bought a Nord lead, bought this Alesis Andromeda, which was an absolute beast.
That's a killer, that thing. Yeah, I know that thing.
Yeah, well. I think they're pretty rare these days. Like, in hindsight, I might not have sold it, but it was pretty big. And even thinking about it, there was a couple of tracks that we wrote using that had the most amazing sounds in them. But it's funny, we didn't really use it that much more after that, And then a lot of the stuff that I did was in the box as well, and now is quite a lot in the box. I mean, I've still got a few analog bits and pieces in my studio. I've got my Dave Smith Polyevolver, got my Moog Sub 37. I have got another Moog Minotaur. Got my original 303. Got another 303, a TT 303 as well. And I've got my Analog Solutions Leipzig, which is a super cool synth module. And then I've got a couple of old analog sequencers and other bits and pieces floating around. But a lot of the stuff I do is in the box. And for me, I am at that point now where I'm like, it sounds great, I like it, or not. But I don't actually care where the sound's coming from. It doesn't mean anything to me now. I like the idea that it's coming from one of my analog synths, but if it isn't, it isn't.
No, totally.
I don't get hung up on that stuff.
No, and I think the gap has closed so massively now between, plugins and, especially in the third party, and even like stuff that you get within Logic now, like Alchemy and stuff like that as well, and the actual hardware that, it's almost like it's not even really a discussion anymore. It's just more about preference, you know what I mean, rather than what's better or what's worse. And I find that debate of like, analog versus digital or plugins versus hardware, I find it really, really boring, if I'm being honest with you, and I'm just not interested in it at all. It's about finding what works for you at the end of the day, and the convenience and the capability of what we're able to do these days is is absolutely phenomenal. It really, really is, you know. And again, there's things in plugins that you just can't do with hardware. So, you know, there's positives on both ends. So obviously, you mentioned like you were originally a Cubase user. When did you end up making the move to Logic?
I was I took a course, a sound engineering course at a place called Alchemia in Britannia Row in Islington. It just opened. It was an amazing idea that was really badly run. So the course itself was 4 months, but the institute was open 24 hours a day, and it was very interesting, and I did learn. But I also learned quite quickly about what not to do as well, and what doesn't really work. And I learned that the sort of balding, aging, total geek kind of sound engineers are not very good teachers, and that you know that sometimes you just have to know. Like, you know, how badly do you want to complicate your life working with these people, you know? So I was there, and one of the things that happened, there was an SSL desk in there. One of the rooms was a beautiful SSL studio, which they also sublet out to sort of producers and bands to come and mix their albums and stuff. And I had some great sessions in there, just listening to what people were doing, you know. And someone came in to demo Logic at Alchemia, and did I think it was called Logic Audio in the beginning, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it was when it was changing from Creator Notator to Logic Audio, and that's what got me interested, and I kind of saw this sort of demo of what you could do with audio, and I was like, okay, yeah, that looks really good. So I made the change.
When
was that? That would have been mid-90s, actually.
Wow, yeah, it would have been. Yeah, and those the sort of first proper versions, if you will, of Logic that obviously then moved on through to, you know, the Logic that we know today. And it's interesting because, like, I know a lot of heads who were using it back then, and, you know, the latest update to 10.5 is probably the biggest single update that there's ever been to Logic. Like, it is just, it's unrecognizable as a program now. It really is. It's completely different, but I think it's been massively improved.
Yeah, I've played around with it a little bit, and yeah, there are elements of it that I'm really excited about. I've realised though that probably I need to actually do a little bit of research as to how certain elements of it work and operate, because I have found myself a little confused at times.
Yeah, especially with that sort of new live loops view, if you're not really sure about how that whole sort of, shall we say, more Ableton style workflow kind of works, and DAWs like that and Bitwig and stuff. But it was quite funny because they come up with the 10.5 update, and we were halfway through a beginner's Logic course when it dropped. So I actually literally had to sit there and rewrite the entire course from like week 3 to like week 8, because it was like, oh, everything I was going to show you is now completely out of date. So I had to like sit there like for, you know, hours a day learning the thing. I mean, luckily I was in lockdown, so I had nothing else to do. So I literally just sat there, just absolutely beating myself into a pulp, trying to learn the thing to be able to teach other people on like 1 week's notice.
Yeah, I mean, I upgraded it halfway through a project, and that did cause a few little minor areas of confusion. But one of the things I do, I mean, I don't know much about it, I'll be honest with you, because I haven't been making too much new music yet. But one of the things I absolutely love about it is that you can just drag a piece of audio onto a track and just assign it to to the sampler or to Alchemy or whatever, and it just instantaneously maps that, chops up and maps that piece of audio across the keyboard in the way that you desire it. And the amount of like flexibility and time saving that does is fantastic.
Oh, it's unbelievable. And you know, as somebody who, like, I have a bit of a slightly hybrid workflow where I'm very, very comfortable in Ableton, and I tend to kind of write a lot of my music in Ableton, but I tend to do all the mixing in Logic. So this has kind of caused a bit of a kind of an interesting situation for me, because it's like, well, if Logic now acts like Ableton, and it does a very good job of doing it, and I'm going to mix it in Logic anyway at the end of this process, why do I need 2 DAWs anymore? and it's like it's really like caused me a bit of internal conflict, because I'm starting a project and I'm like, do I start it in Logic? Do I start it in Ableton? I've actually recently invested in Cubase as well, because I've been writing more stuff for like films and stuff recently, and a lot of the people who I tend to collaborate with in LA, they tend to be Cubase users.
Really?
Yeah. The film industry in LA is pretty Cubase heavy. And a lot of that comes from people like Hans Zimmer, because like that's what they use, and a lot of the composers who come out of working with Hans end up doing their own thing, and they're all big Cubase users. And people who I've worked with in the past, like Junkie XL for example, has moved from Logic to Cubase because of that, if you get what I mean. So it's like I'm a nightmare. I'm all over the place where DAWs are concerned, like, so it's kind of hard to know where to start. But as you say, the drag and drop and the simplicity of Logic these days is just absolutely fantastic, and I think they've done a very, very good job of upgrading it. And I think as you chip away at it and you start to get into it more and more, I think you'll love it, mate. I really do.
Yeah, I want to dedicate more time to it, and just to sort of get in flow and how it works.
Yeah, totally. Well, you can always ask me a couple of questions if you get stuck.
Yeah, I think I've been very tempted at times to just phone you up and say, help.
Dude, you're more than welcome. The phone's always on. I don't always answer the phone to everybody, but you're exactly one of the people who I do answer the phone to. So
I'll remember that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you'll hold that against me later on when I ignore your call in about a week.
Well, luckily for you, I don't do like all night studio sessions anymore, so you won't be getting those sort of 3 a.m. calls. So.
Oh, dude, if you hit me with a 3 a.m. call, mate, I'm in bed. Like, just like I'm such an old man these days. Like, I'm in bed by 11 and that kind of thing. And actually, like, my whole thing is completely flipped. I've found, like, I'm way more creative and way more productive, like, first thing in the morning now.
Mm-hmm.
I've found that out for sure. And actually, like, I write more productively and I produce music productively, like, from the hours of, like, say 7 till like 10 a.m.
Okay, I mean, I tend to use that time of day to do my writing and my studying and my essay writing and some of my psychotherapy work. I find that and reading, that's the time of day that I'm really tuned into that area of my life these days. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's interesting, because obviously I want to ask you about the psychotherapy stuff, which is super interesting to me. But do you have like a set daily routine that you have to sort of you try and stick to as much as possible?
Funnily enough, throughout lockdown and implementing certain changes and progressing through my journey with the therapy and counselling and where I'm at with it, I'm now in a position where Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays, for a certain amount of hours of those days, are strictly dedicated to my private practice, seeing clients, and to my placement at. I do some bereavement counselling for St Joseph's Hospice at the moment, which I'm doing as telephone counselling during lockdown. But when the restrictions ease, I'll be back to face again. And so with the combination of those commitments alongside my own personal therapy sessions and supervision sessions and the reading and writing that's involved in some of the essay work for the masters that I'm doing, I don't have that. I mean, I've got some time and space sort of on those days, but I'm finding that I need to be quite gentle and allow myself to process the work I've been doing with clients and really sort of sit with it and take in what I've been doing and just really kind of feel into what I'm doing. And it's the most incredible, amazing journey, but don't get me wrong, it really is incredible, but it's tough.
Yeah,
it's tough work. And it's tough work because it's tough work anyway, but doing everything on Zoom and online at the moment and being present, sitting at the computer for that 50 minutes and only being able to use sort of visual and audible cues rather than that felt sense of being in a room with somebody is very challenging. So it's quite draining energetically as well. But I'm really enjoying working with people, and yeah, although it's really hard, the learning and the experience is incredible.
No, absolutely, mate, absolutely, and amazing that you've found this other way to serve people. Not only through your music, but also by directly being able to hold space for people.
It is amazing, and it's like 3 or 4 years ago, I wouldn't have even it wouldn't have even been on my radar. And what's really exciting is that my partner, she's a meditation teacher, amazing meditation teacher, and does a lot of work with sound as well and frequencies. We're starting a company together called Listen Up Therapy, which we've been working on for over a year. We're launching that around September, and that's a fusion of her offerings of meditation teachings, and my work, and some other therapists' work, offering therapy, but more specifically geared towards people in our industry, and you're in my industry, so music industry, entertainment industry. And what my partner is doing is creating classes that are geared towards what some of the blockages are for creative people like you and me, and people who work in our industry, and just using that as a basic structure to give them some tools which are based around meditation and breathing and good practices that are going to enhance their abilities to stay present and be present and ground in, and are going to enhance their therapy. So there's no crossover between, there's no direct crossover. Her meditation teachings are not part of the psychotherapy session, and my therapy sessions with clients do not incorporate her meditation teachings, but they run parallel to each other. So they're designed to facilitate getting the most from each of those things, and it's it makes perfect sense to be more grounded and more aware when you come in for therapy, and it also makes perfect sense to be working on yourself in therapy when you come to sit with yourself and go into your inner world in meditation. So we've been working on this for quite a long time, and she's really into her sound healing and into her sound therapy work, and and she also loves techno and electronic music. So there's this beautiful kind of crossover. A lot of the classes that Belinda teaches in various places around London and online are her own electronic music meditation classes, where she's using music that I've written with her for people to shake to move to dance to breathe to, and yeah, it's incredible. And so it's very powerful stuff, and to combine some of those tools with therapy, which is obviously a very personal journey, is it's really exciting, actually.
No, it's incredible. I mean, it's so beautiful just to see how you guys are working together, not only as obviously partners in life, but also in terms of like partners in helping people to kind of shift and work through, like you say, the blockages, and work through ostensibly what you would call trauma. And it's really interesting as well, because we didn't really expand on it a couple of months ago. Our very first live stream like this we did with Tim Green, who is a great friend of mine, and we actually got onto the subject of things like writer's block, creative blocks, that kind of thing. And we actually came to the conclusion, we said, like, actually, you could say that they are it's not just writer's block, it's like it's energetic blockages, and that can be actually, to an extent, unhealed trauma, or things that need to be processed correctly that have become stuck within you. And just to be able to hear how you guys kind of working in such a complementary way. Like you say, like they run parallel to one another, but they're very adjacent, and it allows one to kind of fulfill the potential of the other. And it's very, as you say, very sort of interrelated, but not, you know, they're separate modalities, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely amazing, and it's great to see someone like yourself with such a long-standing history in the scene sort of develop and evolve this way, because, you know, I've had my own experiences over the last few years, and, you know, I've done a huge amount of work on myself as well, and it kind of brought me to an understanding of what we do as DJs and as artists as well, which is, you know, we are effectively performing en masse group sound healings.
Absolutely.
As well as
Absolutely. And you know, going back to the very sort of essence of sort of humanity and you know, tribal rhythms and dancing and you know, celebrating and you know, those kind of gatherings, you know.
Absolutely, and I think they're going to be, as I say, when we get to come back together in that way, I think it's going to be all the more powerful, because I think there's going to be a lot of energy that's going to get brought to those kinds of gatherings. So it's definitely going to be intense. But, you know, as I say, I kind of got to an understanding of that as well, because as I've spoken to you about previously, I'm also a qualified sound therapist, and it's something I've incorporated into the work on MYT as a platform. Like this Thursday, we're doing a whole thing. We actually have an in-house health and wellness expert called Neil, and he works with like brands like Anjuna and things like that as well. We did our sound therapy qualifications together, and we're actually doing a whole thing on how you can become more grounded and more aware and more centered in the studio. So that flow state of that we've all had when, you know, we're in the studio, and it almost feels like you are outside of your body watching yourself write the music, or everything that you touch just works perfectly. Or like I've had experiences where it's like I feel like I've just woken up and there's like a finished record in front of me and I can't even remember writing it. Like, how can you actually put yourself very deliberately and consciously into that state? So, I mean, obviously it doesn't happen every time, but how can you maximize your chances of being in that creative flow state so you can actually write music to the best of your potential, which ultimately, as we both know, allows people to serve other people much better through their art and through their music. So, you know, we're a very different platform to a lot of the others that are out there, because we're attacking it from much more of like a holistic 360 degree personal development, and as well as stuff we've been talking about. You know, we feel like the conversations about the new version of Logic and this type of stuff absolutely should go together, and, you know, hopefully that forms a bit of a benchmark for people to go through in the future.
Absolutely. And I think it's really great that you're incorporating those kind of areas to talk about and to bring more to people's awareness. And you know, it's not for everyone. Some people just have days and moments in the studio where everything flows, and then moments where they don't, and that's the way it is. But I think one of the kind of the more complex issues is when people think there's something wrong with them when things aren't flowing, and that can take them into a place which is not a nice place to be in, you know.
No, exactly. And is that kind of like, you know, latent perfectionism that we kind of all have, and how society has kind of like ingrained that into us.
Yeah.
And it's a real problem.
I had a period of time not that long ago where I was putting a lot of pressure on myself to position myself to be in a position within my DJing career that I was in 10, 15 years ago. So it was I was putting it unconsciously, slightly consciously, but mostly unconsciously. I had this huge expectation of myself that I should be doing that. And then I would find that when I was listening to music, instead of enjoying the music per se, the record, I would, if it was an older record or whatever, I would remember how things were when I played that record when I first got it, and then I would start telling myself a story that's what it should be like now, and then I would start telling myself even more of a story. Well, it's not like that now, so there's something wrong, or I need it to be like that again. And it wasn't until I was able to do the most simple thing, and this happened to me over the period of a week, where I was really sort of beating my head against the wall, and I said, actually, no, you know what, you're exactly where you're supposed to be right now. You're not supposed to be where you were 10 years ago, and you don't need to try to be where you were 10 years ago, because it's okay where you are right now is where you're supposed to be. And once that sunk in, and it's so simple, but once that sunk in, I started enjoying listening to music again in a way that I hadn't done for quite some time. And it was like, this is fine. This is it is what it is. It's beautiful, rather than, and that applies to making music as well. So one of the things that created my writer's block in the studio at times was I'd do something and I'd be thinking, this doesn't sound, does this sound like something I'd play? Does it sound like something I think someone else would play? Which are not bad benchmarks to have. But then if the answer was no, it would take me into a place of like, well, it's not good enough, and it needs to sound like this because this is what everyone's playing. And I'd get myself into that mode where I wasn't making the music that I love for the sake of making the music I love anymore. I was comparing everything to everybody else's work, and that's not a good place for being creative,
No.
But it happens,
No, it definitely does, and I've spoken about this on other podcasts, like the Your Music Industry podcast I did with another one of our dear members here, Dan Fisher, who's part of the team here at MYT, and we were talking about how a lot of young producers, what they do is that they're so caught up with would this fit on, like, I mean, I always use this example, and it's no slight on them, but it's like, would this fit on drum code? And would this other DJ like it? And it's like, that's almost like completely like irrelevant, because in fact what will resonate with the biggest amount of people is the fact that you've been authentic and you've written the music that you were meant to write without imposing other people's tastes onto your music. And I've seen this so many times where people get into a mode of, they're thinking about, like, for a hypothetical example, they're thinking about what Sasha would like, for example, and they're trying to write a track to satisfy somebody that they've never met, and they're trying to satisfy the taste of somebody. I mean, I have a bad enough time satisfying my own taste in music when it comes to writing it. How are you gonna all of a sudden magically satisfy somebody else's taste in music? And the breakthrough for me was, last year I put an EP out on Bedrock, which was, a real personal honour for me, because I've got Bedrock 001 on vinyl in my attic, and to finally be able to release on it all those years later. And ironically, they were the two tracks that just came absolutely pouring out of me, and there was no stopping it, and there was no thought of like, would John Digweed like this? It was literally just, these are the tracks. And almost like a kind of well, take it or leave it. Like, this is what it is. If you like it, fantastic. If you don't, well, that's cool. It's not a problem. It's not a problem. It's when we start to second guess ourselves and we start to make other people's opinions maybe matter a bit more than our own feelings about our own music. That's when I think people start to get into trouble a little bit.
Absolutely.
And you could obviously, transpose that onto any situation in life, really, couldn't you, in terms of, like, jobs, relationships, family situations, friendships, all that type of thing. I've found that there's just an unlimited amount of life lessons in what we do in music, and it's like your good self, it's taken me for a hell of a ride, and it's produced some amazing highs, and it's definitely put me in the gutter on a few occasions. And it's the journey, really, not to sound too cliche or too cheesy about it, but it's the journey that brings us here, But as I say, I just think it's fantastic, the fact that, you know, you've found this whole new way of being able to help people process their emotions in a much more kind of like individualized way with what you do psychotherapy wise. I just think it's absolutely fantastic, and it's fascinating that you've chosen that path. What made you go into it, if you don't mind asking?
What made me go into it, I think, was that when I went from sort of crazy period of a downhill spiral with my addiction issues, and then I got clean and did a rehab for 6 weeks. One of the things that I learned about when I was in the rehab center was about CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and was shown some of that from some of the counseling that was there, and it really resonated with me that I could name some of my core beliefs, challenge them, and move through them, and be able to challenge what I believe about myself and do something about it. And there was something that really stuck with me about that. It was quite profound. And when I left there, I was just very, very curious about what makes us do the things we do, what makes us who we are, what makes us feel the way we do. And that was the sort of beginning of the curiosity, I suppose. And then I took a year off Facebook, a whole year. Did you hear that? A year. And these days I can't even take an hour off Facebook. But and I wrote. So I was journaling every day, and it came up early in that year, in 2017. I had a vision. I can't really pick up the camera and turn it around to show you, but to my left there is a blue velvet armchair, and behind it there's a bookcase full of books. Anyway, the vision was me sitting in a comfy chair with a bookcase full of books behind me, talking to somebody in a room about their issues, and it was quite a clear vision. And I journaled that I just had this thought: why don't I train in psychology? Why don't I do a degree? And I can see myself. I think my words were, I can see myself sitting in a room talking to somebody right now. And the long story short is, this is the room. I'm sitting in it. The vision has become a reality, and that thought about doing a psychology degree online turned into doing a psychotherapy master's degree at an institute in London. So I was living in Ibiza when all this happened, but I moved back. In 2018, mostly because of the course and to follow this path. And here I am talking to you now from that room that was just a vision in my head in 2017.
Incredible, mate. And just such a wonderful story to hear how that's kind of unfolded for you as well, you know. And it's amazing to kind of like have you become sort of part of the family here at MYT, because it's like that's exactly what we stand for. Where, you know, one of our biggest sort of mantras, if you will, is that in order to become the best artist you can be, you've kind of got to become the best version of yourself. So, you know, everything that we do is not just geared through obviously wanting people to be successful in their music careers. We want them to be successful and fully realized human beings as well. Like, and that's really what the intention is, and that's really what, you know, we try and put out there as much as possible, that, you know, this is a community that comes together to kind of support each other through good times and in bad. And we're all on this journey of like self-realization and self-actualization together. It's just that music is a beautiful kind of conduit for that deeper work to happen, really. Yeah, so it's a hell of a ride, mate. It's a hell of a ride indeed, you know. And it's funny just to have that kind of perspective going through what we're going through at the moment as well, with this the stuff that's coming up at the moment. It's so raw, it's so potent what's going on in the world, as we mentioned at the beginning.
Well, I mean, this might sound arrogant. It's certainly not meant to, but I think right now we probably need more psychotherapists than we do DJs, and there's a lot of people that are really struggling with so many different aspects of living, of existing right now, whether it's being like isolated, whether it's having lost income, lost jobs, whether it's relationships, whether it's insecurity, self-confidence, anxieties and depressions, or it's all happening, but it's magnified at the moment because of the conditions that we are working our way through, with all these different social dilemmas as well that are sort of going on parallel to what's happened with the virus and what that's created. And I think that one of the things that we intend to do with Listen Up Therapy, and this is work in progress, is, and we're talking to some, I like to refer to them as quite important people who are connected to the industry, is to be able to, at some level, get some funding so that we can subsidise some of the sessions for people that can't afford to do it themselves. So we're not going down the charity route. We're not becoming a charity because it's not supposed to be that. But at some level, I want to make sure that I'm helping people that need help the most. And that's really important to me because people have helped me when I've needed help the most. And I want to be able to do the same back to other people. So I'm in talks with some people that that you already work with, at the Association for Electronic Music, and I'm in talks with some other people who are a couple of generations down from me, but very very connected, doing a lot of very important work within communities of people that are a little bit less privileged, shall we say. So I'm looking at all of that as well. So as well as running this as a business for people that can afford it, to some extent, I want to be able to provide the service for people that can't afford it too.
Well,
important.
You and Belinda have MYT's full support, and anything that we can do to partner with you to, spread the message, to be able to help people in any way, shape or form, like, we are here and we've got your back no matter what, dude, honestly, because it would be the thing that always I always get blown away by is, like, I've done a lot of one-to-one teaching in the past and still do it to an extent now, and I always made the joke that I was like 1/3 production tutor, 1/3 life coach, 1/3 therapist.
Yeah.
And, like, you do have to wear all three hats in those situations. But the main word that I would use to describe what I've been doing coaching artists for the best part of the last decade or more, and, to an extent, I don't want to speak for you, but, the main word that comes for me is, like, it's a privilege. It's a privilege to help these people. I feel so honoured that these people who, sign up for sessions with me, or they sign up for our membership, or, even just do little things like they buy a course, like, that is such an expression of trust that, we're here to help them and guide them in whatever way it is, whether it is, really deep psychotherapy work like you're offering now, or, artist development coaching, or even just, learning how to use a piece of software. Like, it's all a very deep expression of trust from one person to another, and it's a commitment I think we both take very, very seriously.
We do, and thank you very much for your offer to be behind what we're doing and what we're working on. And we are working hard on this now to have everything kind of ready for around the September period, so that we can launch this as people are starting to have a bit less restrictive movement, but at a time where they're probably we feel they're probably going to need the help the most.
Oh yeah, as that adjustment period happens, for sure. And speaking of launches, I think we've maybe eked out this evening long enough before we make the announcement of what we've been cooking up together, so to speak, or what you've been cooking up for us, really, more accurately. So shall I put everybody out of their misery and let them know what we've been up to?
I'd love you to, yeah.
I'd love you to, because I need a way and I need to get off this thing. We did this with Christoph a few weeks ago, and the guy literally squirmed in his chair for 2 hours because he forgot to go for a wee before we started.
I'm all right.
Are you all right? Oh, good. Okay, fine. We'll edit that bit out, don't worry. But yeah, so basically, at the beginning of the lockdown, we became very aware at MYT of, like, you know, various situations, and the fact that, you know, artists didn't have a lot of income coming in at that time, and that's why we kicked into gear, working with people like Tim Green, Christoph, Holt, Rinzen, Anama, Nick Muir from Bedrock, and obviously tonight with your good self. And we obviously got talking very, very early on, and we put into action a bit of an action plan, which is starting to come into fruition. And I'm happy to announce that next month, Mr. Bushwacka himself will be launching his very own remixing course on MYT, which I am absolutely thrilled by, because I've tried not to fanboy too much tonight, Matthew. Honestly, I've tried not to, but I've been such a massive fan of yours, and it's like, this is like another round of it where it's like, I was a huge Sasha fanboy back in the day. I ended up working with him in the studio. I was a huge Junkie XL fanboy. I ended up working with him. And I seem to be on this like kind of like mission to work with all of my heroes musically. So the fact that we got to work together on this was absolutely phenomenal. And, you know, we're in the stages of, you know, putting the final pieces together of this course, and it's going to be out in the next few weeks. So we're going to be making more announcements soon. And what Matthew's come up with has been, honestly, it's one of the best, if not the best, set of resources about remixing I think I've ever seen. So it's going to be incredibly worthwhile. And obviously you've been talking about doing a lot of remixes during lockdown. So it's been amazing to sort of like see what you've been doing on that kind of front, and obviously this is your very first online course as well. So how did it feel committing your years of knowledge about remixing to video? How was it?
Well, thanks a lot for letting me do this, and for allowing me to get involved with you and make your transition and to make this happen. And I also have to thank my partner Belinda, because she really helped a lot with the initial concept around remixing, and from that one conversation that I had with her spawned all these ideas as to what content could go within that remix masterclass. I found the experience of doing it actually really enjoyable, and it's flowed very well. And I feel that most of what it's about is mindset. Most of what it's about is how one goes about thinking about what they're doing, and about just the mindset behind it. And it's not so much a sort of colouring by numbers course where I'm on logic the whole time going, do this and then do this and then do this and then do it. It's not really, there's a bit of that, and I have demonstrated throughout this course some of the things that I've done on a particular remix. But for me, most of the joy of it's been about talking about the mindset behind approaching remixing, and the different connotations and things that may come up, or things that you may have considered but then brushed to the side, or may have never considered. And I've just shared my thoughts really, and just tried to keep it simple. And you know, it's kind of weird for me because I'm not in the studio quite as much as I used to be at the moment. So like technically on something like a new version of Logic or whatever, I would say I'm a little bit rusty. So that's not what this course is about. You know, if you want to go and do a course that teaches you specifics about how to use sequencers or whatever, there's plenty of them, and you've put together quite a few amazing ones. I've watched a couple of them myself, and they're so well done. And I felt that the gap wasn't another one of those. It was more about, well, this is who I am, this is what I've done, and this is why I did it, and this is how I did it, and this is what I could have done, and this is what you can do. And that's what it's about. It's just about the journey, really.
No, absolutely, and that's what comes through in the content as well. That, you know, we've got for the course is that it's that really interesting and really subtle kind of like shift in mindset from, you know, writing something completely original to actually reworking somebody else's creative vision, shall we say, or, you know, facilitating a new understanding of that. And that's what really has stood out. And I really do think it's an incredibly unique resource that you've created, and it's really gonna, I think it's gonna really set the benchmark for courses of its type. So, you know, as I said before, you know, it's an honor to be working with you, but it's also that word I used before, it's a privilege to have you on the platform, and to, you know, you are just like, at the moment, you are just the absolute definition of the type of artist that we love to work with at MYT, because you encompass everything. The personal, the psychological, the mindset, the technical, that kind of thing. And, you know, it's just such a win-win, and it's such a beautiful, perfect fit that I'm just really, really happy that it's kind of happened this way, and I can't wait to get it out there to people and to have them give sort of feedback. And one of the things that we are working on at the moment, which we will announce more details of later, is that we're going to do a remix competition around that, with some really interesting new partners that we're yet to announce, which we're going to get to in the next couple of weeks. And there's going to be quite a lot to get our teeth into, and for people to get their teeth into. And like you said, with the sample pack, it's going to be really interesting to see what people do with the skills that they learn and the mindset shifts that they have through the course, so we can hear what they're doing with that knowledge.
Absolutely. And the remix competition aspect of this is actually, I'm really excited by it, in the same way that I'm excited to hear what other people have done with the sample pack. That you know, that here we have a sort of potential for a number of people that choose to do so, to go away and remix one of my tracks, and the one that we think absolutely rocks it will end up being released. And that's exciting, because, you know, the idea of getting various different versions done of a track with this in mind is, I'm just buzzed about it. I'm like, oh, come on, what do you want to do? You've watched the course, you've heard what I've got to say. This is some of the things that I do. This is some of the experiences that I've had. I've thrown a few options your way and stuff, and you know, here's some parts, here's some stems. Go away and think about it and see what comes back. You know. Yeah,
it's so exciting.
You know, just thinking, it would actually be I'd love to hear people's stories behind what they've created as well. Like, why have you done this? You know, what was your inspiration? You know?
No, absolutely. And there's always like really good ways of doing that, where, you know, obviously the people who, you know, when we do go through with it, there will be ways for people to kind of communicate their thinking and their mindset and their stories to you about what inspired them and what they were going for and what their perspective is when they went in for this kind of remix, you know, or what they've kind of ended up doing. So there's going to be some really, really interesting aspects to it, because it does introduce that element of like almost like a Joseph Campbell style hero's journey, if you will. And it's that thing of like, we're all storytellers in one way or another, musically speaking.
You know, I've just got my business head on, which doesn't get put on very often, to be honest with you. And I'm just thinking from a business point of view that the ultimate goal would be to get people to purchase the remix masterclass, then purchase the sample pack, then hand in the remix. And if it doesn't get accepted and they're feeling depressed, then they can come and pay me to do their psychotherapy as well.
Oh, mate, you've nailed it. There you go. So you can do a whole psychotherapy session based on how they can handle the rejection that they've just been dealt with.
It's triple winner.
Mate, you've got it all covered, mate. I don't believe that your business head doesn't go on very, very often when you've just actually covered off everything. Like, that's amazing. Wicked, mate, wicked. I love it. I absolutely love it. Well, listen, mate, look, thanks for your time this evening, mate. This has been amazing.
It's been great talking to you, Paul, and I'm really excited for this to come out. And I hope that people have got something from the conversation and taken something positive away from it. And I really hope that when the time comes and this class comes out, that people get something from it and it inspires them to try to do things that they might not have done before, and just gives them a little bit of creative direction, you know?
No, absolutely, absolutely. And to be honest, the comments have been going crazy on just how much people have enjoyed listening to two old farts talk about how good it was back in the day for a couple of hours, amongst other things. So, it's
Old fart?
Speak for yourself, mate. I've only just turned 40, so I'm still playing catch up, mate. Do you know what I mean?
I thought you said I looked fresh at the beginning of the conversation. What happened?
You look fresh at the beginning of the conversation. I'm not sure about now.
You brought me out, man. I've aged.
Mate, I'm intense. I do that to everyone, mate. That's why I'm single.
It's been great talking to you, Paul. I really enjoyed it.
No, absolutely, mate. Absolutely. And thanks to everyone for tuning in as well. And yes, stay tuned for more details about the launch of the course. We're going to be letting you all know when that's going to be happening and the remix competition shortly. And yeah, so take a look at our social media, check the website, www.transition.studio. All the news will be up there. You can sign up for our email list, and we will be providing more updates that way as well. So yes, that will be it for the evening. Again, thank you once again to Matthew for his time and for his attention, and to all of you guys as well. And we shall see you in the next live stream. And yes, we will announce when those things are going to be happening very, very shortly. So thanks, guys. Look after yourselves. Stay safe. Do whatever you need to do to stay safe in this world at the moment. It's a bit of a roller coaster, but we're all going to get through it together.